So again, forget that I'm wearing white, I should be wearing red. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with the saying that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. You've heard that before, I'm sure. And most of us who grow up in the church are familiar with the fact that the early days of the church were tumultuous and quite dangerous. And many people, men and women alike, gave their lives for the faith. We're familiar with this, right? And yet, I think most of us don't have a full appreciation for what the Roman world was like at that time and why the Christians were singled out and persecuted. If I were to just ask any old person, why did the Romans persecute the Christians, what do you think their response would be? I know for myself, growing up, I would have said, well, it's because they didn't believe in all the gods, right? It's because they didn't believe that the emperor was actually divine. And that is true, but it's only partially true. And forgive me, I have to give you a little bit of historical context. You see, in the Roman time, I've been reading more and more about what it was like, reading the writings of the people in this time, including the pagans. And it was not uncommon at all for people to deny the divinity of the emperor. After all, these were intelligent people who built aqueducts that still stand today, who built road systems throughout the known world and built in a world economy that conquered different cultures and built this huge empire that we still talk of today. These were brilliant people, and they knew the emperor wasn't God. They knew that. And also, this was a time in which the Roman Empire spanned most of the world. And we can imagine in the Roman Empire with all of these new roads and trade, you had in these cities in Rome, in these Greek cities like Athens, but as well as the city of Rome itself, people from all over the world. At any given time in Rome, you would have found Egyptians, Nubians, Chaldeans, Germans. You would have found people from all different walks of life and races. And they all had their own gods. And that was perfectly fine. Nobody cared who you worshiped. You would have found strange new cultic sects coming up from the east, right alongside traditional Greek temples and Roman temples. You would have found Egyptian priests with their own customs. All of these living side by side. Everyone had their own household gods and had their own unique expressions. It was an incredibly pluralistic time. Nobody much cared what you believed or what gods you worshipped. We still have extant writings of the philosophers who doubted the existence of divinity at all. And they publicly talked about it. You had philosophers on the one hand who were hedonists, who believed that everything was about pleasure, and on the other hand you had Stoics who said the exact opposite. You had skeptics who questioned everything. All kinds of philosophies and thought were allowed. It was an incredibly pluralistic time for ideology. But one thing mattered. How do we hold it all together? How do we keep all of these differing views and all of these differing peoples and customs in line? One thing mattered. The power of Rome. Everything was about the Pax Romana, about the social order, making sure that nothing tipped the balance of power. Everybody was free to believe whatever they wanted, so long as it didn't interfere with Rome and its power. And so you had wise people who said they didn't believe in the gods, but they still did their sacrifice to the emperor. How did Rome seek to control and maintain its status quo? By building the largest army the world had ever seen. By making sure that its might was so powerful that no one would dare question. By building an economic system where being in the good graces of the emperor was absolutely essential for you to do any commerce at all. By doing what else? By keeping the people placated. Giving them great shows and lavish parties and drunken orgies. By giving people sensual delights so that they wouldn't even question the opulence of Rome. Powerful army, economic control, and licentiousness. This is how Rome kept the balance. You were free to believe whatever you want, so long as you did not question the authority of Rome and threaten its power. And so we can see here how Paul goes and stands before the Greeks, and it was not uncommon to hear people make all kinds of arguments. There were atheists in that time as well, and no one ever killed them for questioning the divinities of God, of the gods. But there was something different about these Christians. Sure, they had strange belief, but there was plenty of strange beliefs. If it were only that, they would have scoffed and laughed and said, "Good day, sir. We'll hear the next person and their ideas." But there was something different about the Christians. They didn't just believe it. They lived it. And the more they began to live it, the more it threatened the hegemony of the emperor and the stability of Rome. How did it control its power? Through the army. Well, today, we celebrate Nereus and Achilles, who were Roman soldiers, who were forced to persecute and kill those Christians who would not follow the emperor. And the Holy Spirit came to these men and convicted their hearts, and rather than carrying out the act, they themselves found themselves believing in the risen Lord. And that's all well and good that they believed in Jesus, but they did the one thing that you cannot do. They defied the emperor. And they would no longer raise their sword against the innocent. They were a threat to power. We have so many stories of the early church, and almost all of them can demonstrate this point. You have so many young women who were martyred. Why? Because they wouldn't give in to the lust of some great patrician. Because they believed that their virtue actually mattered. And they were willing to fight to the end of their life to keep the Lord at the center of their life and would not give in. Now, that's a threat. That's a threat to the fun, to the licentious spirit of the time. And so it should not be any surprise to us that the emperor, when he chose to persecute these Christians, often chose to do it through violence and through public display. Send them to the lions in the midst of the gladiatorial fighting. Kill two birds with one stone. Silence our opposition and reinforce our hegemony. Give the people a circus and remind them who to fear. Sisters and brothers, this is the important thing I think that we need to remember as Christian people. The world doesn't much care what we believe in the silence of our hearts. It doesn't much care what we say in the privacy of our rooms. But the moment we begin to live our faith and it stands as a contradiction, when other people see the way that you live and it convicts their own heart, when the way that you live and the way that you treat other people stands in opposition to the powers of the day, be warned that the world does not like that. And so the Lord gives us a helper. He gives us a spirit to inflame our hearts, to give us a supernatural courage in the face of the world itself when it rears up its ugly head against you. To remind you of this fact, that no matter how big its army, how strong its economic control, no matter how much the people want to give in to their licentiousness, we have a God who has defeated death itself. The power of the resurrection is this central key that nothing the world throws at you can defeat you if you walk with the Spirit of the Lord, moved by the great Spirit of his advocate. Sisters and brothers, we hear a lot of talk in this day about progress. But I'm here to tell you that if you know about the history of the world, you realize that there's not much progress. That old spirit of the world that has been sleeping for some 2,000 years is merely waking up again. But we have an advocate. We have one who has defeated even death itself. It's time that we remember it, and not only just believe it in our hearts, or speak it in hushed whispers to one another, but we begin to live it, to stand as that contradiction once more.